Well, good morning. It's Saturday morning. Today we're only going to read one verse, Acts 6:1. In these days, when the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint by the Hellenists arose against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution. Now, what could all that mean? Well, the Hellenists would be Greek-speaking Jews, Jews from the diaspora, the dispersion. The Jews had been Jerusalem still stood. Jerusalem wasn't destroyed until 70 A.D., but the Jews had been gone, many of them, probably since the exile. It'd be hundreds of years, but there were Jewish colonies or groups that had moved to Alexandria, they had moved to Greece, they had moved to Turkey, which they called Asia Minor. So there were Jews all over the place, and like everybody else in the ancient world, they tended to speak Greek, and so they're called the Hellenists, because Helena is an old word for Greece. And so you got Greek-speaking Jews and Aramaic-speaking Jews in the same community there in Jerusalem, and the Greek-speaking ones start complaining, well, our widows aren't getting the same attention that your widows are in the daily distribution of food. Remember that they pooled everything and distributed it to each as any had need, it says. And so here what they're saying is, well, you're being preferential in your treatment of some people, and some people are getting better attention than other people, and some people aren't. It's not fair. Have you ever heard that before in the church? Hello? Yes, we have, all the time. Kind of reminds me of when the Hebrews left Egypt, and got out of the wilderness and began to grumble and complain. It becomes very easy for groups to take on that mindset of complaining and grumbling. And it becomes easy for groups to do that when they are they become kind of insular, and they have a perceived enemy out there, and they are getting better treatment. Now in a church, it could be the old guard and the young people. I knew a guy who told me in great detail about his church, which existed on the far edges of the suburbs of a fairly large southern city. And as the city grew, new housing developments were built, younger people moved in, and began to come to his church. And he had set the church up to welcome them and do things that would bring them in, and they were happy. In their minds, they were coming into a church that was fairly contemporary in its music and its style. The old guard saw it as a church that was very much old-fashioned. And there was terrible conflict that broke out. And finally, he left the denomination over that conflict. I went to a church myself one time, a United Methodist church in the distant suburbs of Atlanta, and it was clearly an old country church. But the suburbs had grown up around it, and so all of a sudden there was this influx of younger people. And I went in there with my brother-in-law, who was a good bit younger than me, and so we're sitting there, he and his wife, and I'm looking around, and I realize there's two distinct groups of people here. Younger people from the suburbs and older people from the community, the original farmers and and other people who lived out there. And the pastors got up and started trying to cope with speaking to both of these groups at the same time, and they were having a pretty hard time of it. So it happens even in our churches that groups arise, and we have the old guard and the new people. Once had a lady tell me she wanted me to find them new members. We want new members. We want younger people. We want 100 new members. And I thought if we had 100 new members, it would completely change this church, which she thought of it as her church, and you wouldn't be happy with 100 new members. Not at all. And it never happened, but at any rate. So what happens is that they start having this conflict. Anytime you get a bunch of people together, you're going to have a conflict. And it could be over something very, very simple. I know of a church that had, when the interim pastor left, he left a big fat file. And the file was called It's All About Coffee. And all of the interim dynamics of that church had been played out over the coffee hour. Should we have coffee hour or not? What time should we have coffee hour? Should we provide coffee free, or should we make people pay for it? Should we just make the coffee in the kitchen in the big urn? Or should we actually outsource the coffee and get good coffee? Or should we just, try to make good coffee ourselves? All of these questions were big fights. They don't need to be big fights. You just need to have some decent coffee. But that was how things happened there. So we look for these little issues and we fight about them because they're safe. We could fight about coffee all day long if the real issue is we don't like the leadership, or we don't like the direction that the leadership is taking us, or we don't like the decisions that have already been made. It's more difficult to fight against, fight about those things, and those are the kinds of things that we're going to fight about them, and we lose. We have to leave, and we don't really want to leave. We just want our way. So conflict emerges. Oh, it's hard, isn't it? I hope that your church is not having conflict like that. I hope that your widows are getting their portion in the daily distribution, and it's distributed evenly and well, and that everyone is happy. As a guy said one time, "Welcome to our church, come and fight." And we all laughed, but that's kind of the way it is sometimes, isn't it? Well, I hope that it gets better for you and in your situation, and I hope that you have a great Saturday. Don't let me bum you out with all of this, and we will see you Monday morning.